Informed consent for biomedical research is complicated. For fields like stem cell science and biobanking, it is virtually impossible. Getting folks to grasp the material is just the tip of the iceberg. These areas are moving so fast, researchers can't predict where materials will end up or how they may be used down the track. It's a big ethics mess with no easy answers. Researchers have tried to solve this problem in a multitude of ways. Less jargon, shorter forms, layered approaches, multimedia, one-on-one genetic counseling. All are effective to an extent, but none can reach the standard of comprehension needed to clear the high bar of informed consent. Studies suggest that regardless of what we do, getting people on the same page is way more difficult than we'd expect. We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. And it's important to note that our participants aren't horses. They have their own goals, expectations, and situational motivators. Many don't care about the scientific and medical complexities of biobanking and stem cell science, and are driven by life circumstances and pre-existing beliefs. They don't feel motivated to read the form. The academic literature on informed consent suggests that there are two broad approaches to solving the problem of informed consent, though these are not always mutually exclusive. Each has its own pattern. Some researchers and clinicians aim to solve this problem by focusing on maximum comprehension to get legal release. They realize that even when the person has signed on the dotted line, they're not getting perfect comprehension. This method focuses all of its energy on preloading the participants before consent is given and tends not to spend too much energy on a follow-up after getting that legal clearance. This cohort of studies and approaches is data and outcome-driven, and we can call this the comprehension-first approach. In the other approach, participants don't need to be masters of all the study details, just informed enough to be able to protect their autonomy. In this view, consent becomes a threshold to a longer conversation that grows comprehension over time. This group is about engaging the participant community over a longer term, and this is the consent-first approach. Each of these two groups has a different relationship and attitude towards multimedia and how it might be used in the process of generating informed consent. In the literature, each of these approaches has their own underlying epistemology, which is related to the way that comprehension is measured. The comprehension-first outlook is focused on communication of precise information in as little time as possible, and immediate comprehension testing as a result. This method is all about making sure that everybody is on the same page, with participants being on the same page as the doctors. It'd be an ideal way to get things done, but it has a lot of difficulty attached to it. Studies informed by this logic recognize that multimedia methods hold some value, but due to the methodologies that they use, they find that media has minimal impact on comprehension. Comprehension-first studies emphasize the precise translation of information from clinician and researcher to the participants. And this tends to lend itself to words and conversation. This approach demonstrates a particular distrust of imagery, favoring written and verbal methods over visual, animated, tactile, or any other form of multimedia. The strength of the visual in communicating complex information in an accessible way plays out as a bit of a weakness for this cohort. By giving participants the power to decode visual information, we also give them the ability to infer meaning and bring in existing understanding and expectations. And a lot of these things are just sort of seen as noise. This reflects a long tradition of distrust of the visual in scientific fields. Accessible information is also potentially ambiguous, and ambiguity can be really dangerous. The consent-first approach has a longer-term view of comprehension, treating it as an outcome of ongoing partnerships and mutual engagement. Methodologically, studies of this kind are interested in drawing out existing outlooks and expectations of participants and investigating how those might impact their developing understanding. They tend to reflect a more user-centric or co-design approach, employ multiple success metrics, led by, but not exclusively defined by comprehension, and are characterized by a two-way interaction between researchers and participants. Studies that come out of this epistemological background have much more favorable attitudes towards multimedia and a generally positive relationship with visual imagery.
Consent-first papers spend significantly more time describing the creation of multimedia resources, including the perspectives of research participants, media creators, and they tend to use more interdisciplinary sources. Studies focusing on how multimedia components such as visual, audio, animation, etc. impact on broad-scale comprehension yield better results in testing when it comes to testing comprehension. It also does better when testing engagement over a longer period of time. Regardless of the epistemological approach, there are some things that are universally agreed on. Multimedia is effective, though this effectiveness varies from study to study. Formats that utilize multiple mediums of delivery are consistently more engaging and comprehensive than any single delivery method. From a creator's perspective, the key cause of this variation is obvious. Not all media is equal. Quality of production and targeting of audience tastes are key to effective multimedia communication. Yet, in much literature, the idea of quality is not addressed at all. It is surprising how few studies looking to test the effectiveness of multimedia in consent comprehension included samples of the media used. Studies that reflected on the production logic and process were most likely to include samples of the finished media, and they tended to report better results when it came to the application of multimedia and understanding. What would that look like? The audio and text delivered tone and specific information, along with appropriate background. The visuals provide illustrative or symbolic messages, adding clarity and depth. Animation and visual sequencing add a sense of pace and time while giving the audience a chance to control their intake by pausing, rewinding, or looking back through the page. Framing, composition, and eye path create and enforce associations between ideas. In live co-creation workshops and interviews, participatory engagement can pull in all the senses, creating a total sensory experience for the audience while giving the researcher or communicator an insight into the subject's tastes, values, and expectations. When coordinated appropriately, these various elements work in unison to enhance the memorability and clarity of the message. Knowing your audience is also key to success. Visual approaches have universal appeal, but style is a language. It can implicitly frame audience expectations and target particular cohorts. The right style can make an audience feel seen and represented. Inversely, generic or mismatched styles can alienate an audience by making them feel condescended to. From a co-design perspective, multimedia should generate more than clarity. It should invite engagement. The best examples of multimedia invite a sense of ownership. When you think about ownership, it really comes down to the notion of fandom. Within fandom, ownership comes in two forms. The first is literal ownership, where the participant has an object they can take home and refer to. This has the potential to create a material connection between participants and research projects. To achieve this, we must make multimedia worth owning. The second is psychological ownership, where the subjects actively take on the identity of participation. This is a deeper connection that generates a desire to protect the project and champion it to others. This is the holy grail of multimedia engagement. To get the best of understanding from our participants and improved informed consent, we should generate a sense of ownership. To achieve this sense of ownership, we must create more than good communication. Media that speaks the language of our participants, has a clear vision, invites inquiry, and a two-way conversation.